You might think that you hate your job and the only solution is to leave and go somewhere else, but is that necessarily going to be the best solution? Might there be things that you can do within your current job which will improve things and make it so much better for you? That's what we talk about in this episode. I'm Jeremy Klein and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to the Change Work Life podcast, where we're all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. A few weeks ago, we spoke to Numi Natan about the subject of leadership, and that's a theme we're going to be continuing this week. But rather than talking about leading others, we're going to be talking about leading yourself. Now, that's not a concept I was particularly familiar with, so I'm delighted to welcome Jamie Crosier to introduce you to the subject. Jamie is a speaker, business owner, full-time pastor, and the host of the Organise Like a Pro podcast, which offers tips and tricks to help you get and stay organised in every area of your life. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon in your neck of the woods and good morning in mine.
And goodness knows whatever it is when everyone's listening to this. Jamie, can you expand a little bit on what it is you do sort of as a pastor and as a business owner?
Well, I like to utilize every minute of my day. I am a full-time pastor. That's a 45-hour work week. Most of the time, it's administration. I also have a background in marketing, so I'm on a marketing team for our church, and a lot of it is business administration, and every so often, I get to preach. I love to write a few blogs. I love to speak to different groups and just travel around. And then outside of that, I'm married. I have 2 children and a dog. And on the side, I have my own business. It's a small boutique and it's a lot of fun. And I really just love meeting new people and being able to have conversations with them. And then recently I started the Organize Like a Pro podcast that will air in about a month from today.
Tell me a bit about the genesis of that, sort of a podcast all about organising your life. I mean, I'm a massive sucker for life hacks, be they just habitual or using, everyone loves a good app or whatever, be it Trello or something like that. So how did you come to decide to start a podcast on that subject?
Well, it's funny. I don't know about your listeners or you, but if you ever think I'm going to have a plan to do something and you try it and it ends up going just totally sideways. I mentioned that I had a small boutique and I actually thought that I would start a podcast that would help me monetize the boutique and talk more about boutiques and about having side businesses. Side hustles is kind of, I don't know if you use that term there, we use it here, side hustles. And so I decided to do a poll and I polled more than 100 people that knew me and just left an open-ended question and said, if I were to have a podcast and talk about something I'm an expert in, what would it be? And I really thought it would be having a side business because I talk about that all the time. Overwhelmingly, more than 80% of the responses were about organizing your life, spreadsheets and data analyzing and leading yourself well, things like that. I was very surprised. And I thought, let's just do it. Let's just change the idea from a side business, side hustle podcast to how can you organize yourself well? And that's where we are today.
How did you come to be known amongst these 100 people as the expert on that kind of thing?
I think that organically happens. When you love something, you don't realize how much you talk about it. You don't realize how your face probably lights up and how you can almost command a room in a conversation about that topic. And other people will take notice, I think, more than you do. You know, the people closest to you, they see your blind spots in good and bad ways. They can tell you about the things that you can improve on, but they also tell you about things that you don't realize you are really an expert. And so it's great to poll your friends, your family, the people that know you best for both things. What things can I improve on? And what things would you say I'm an expert in? I was very surprised. And once I talked to my friends about the results of that and how surprised I was, they were surprised that I was surprised.
You mentioned when you were describing your podcast, this idea of leading yourself. So let me start with a very open question. It's not going to be a concept which is familiar to a lot of people. What do you mean when you're talking about leading yourself?
I think it really depends on the situation. However, I think a way to arrive at that is think about whatever the situation might be, your workplace, your family place, your relationship, where you spend most of your life. And if there's an area where you feel contentment or stress, the way I think about leading yourself well is ask yourself, what would it look like for this particular situation to actually be beneficial to me? What would it look like if I was in this situation and I was happy in this relationship or in this work environment, whatever it might be? Think about the things that would change to make that situation better. And then instead of putting that on the other person or the other party or the situation to make that change, make it yourself. Be the change and bring the change. Because when you are able to be the change yourself, you have more control over that. You can't control another person to be a certain way, but you can be that way. And when you bring that into the relationship, into the workplace, into the family, whatever it might be, you are fostering the change yourself just by leading yourself into the change that you're looking for.
Let's dig into that in a bit more detail, particularly in the context of jobs and careers. So someone comes to you and says, Jamie, I have been working in this place now for 2 years and I am so unhappy. The work is boring. I feel stressed just getting out of bed. And then also when I'm trying to go to sleep the night before, my boss is a nightmare. I just don't feel like I'm doing any good whatsoever. I need to change jobs. How do I change jobs? So perhaps you can start to talk us through the process and maybe whether actually changing jobs is the right thing to do, or this the start of the thought process to begin thinking about this.
I love in your example here, you included the time that someone has been at the particular job. And that's always my first question too. How long have you been there? Because I would say within the first couple years, the other thing to remember is anytime you're in a new group dynamic, I like to call it the norming, storming, conforming, and performing phases. When you first are into, especially a workplace environment, you first move there, it's like your honeymoon phase. You're so excited. Everything seems so nice. And then comes the storming phase. You really start to realize, oh, these are people with flaws. And I actually don't believe the same things that some of them believe. And these things about them annoy me. And that first season, when you get into that, you think, what have I done? I am so unhappy. I need to get out of this situation. My first thought process on that is write it out, because you usually get to the conforming and the performing phase pretty quickly once you identify that you're actually just in this learning phase, the storming phase of people that you're working with. And it's in that situation that when you learn how to lead yourself well, that you can quickly move into a performing stage with that group of individuals, or at least identify this isn't actually going to work for me, and I can confidently move on into a different job or a different career, knowing that I first led myself well for a period of time.
And how long? Because 2 years, okay, that's maybe, I don't know. I think that it takes at least 3 to 6 months once you start a new job to kind of get your feet under the table and feel like you kind of know what you're doing. 2 years, I'd kind of hope already to be there, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I would actually say 2 to 3 years is a really good time frame of knowing, but I wouldn't say, let's say you were unhappy for the first 2 years. And then all of a sudden it dawns on you, oh, why don't I try to lead myself well? Give it some time, because change and creating a culture of change will take time. So it really depends on the moment you decide, instead of putting this on other people, I'm going to put this on myself to lead myself well. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen overnight, especially if there's a culture, a really negative culture in that business environment. Changing culture in a community takes 3 years. Last time I looked at some research, just in a small community where I live, there's about 4,000 people. And some research we did when a company that I work with bought another company, they did some research on how long does it take to change the workplace environment in that company. And their research came up with it's going to take about 3 years to really change the entire environment, the work environment in that company. Now, that's a bigger scale. So when you're talking about the people that you work with, just know it's not going to happen overnight. But once you really decide and dedicate yourself to, I am going to be the change, I'm going to lead myself well, and I want the people that I work with to have a change as well, so that our work environment can be amazing together, even with our differences, give it some time. Give it 3-6 months at least before you pull the plug on that.
I've got lots of questions going through my head. Let me start with this slightly negative question, but it's kind of, why bother? Let's say you've been somewhere and it's been a couple of years and, there's not been that much turnover in your colleagues. There's not been that much change in the business in the period you've been there. You've identified that you're unhappy. Why go through what initially sounds like quite a lot of effort to make changes from within rather than just think, okay, this place isn't for me, then I'll just need to make a better decision next time?
That is a great question. I would very humbly suggest that in any type of situation like that, the responsibility for the environment has a little bit to do with the person themselves. So let's just put me for an example. If I'm in a workplace and I've been there for 2 years and I'm very unhappy and I get, why would I bother? Why would I waste any more of my valuable time here when I can go somewhere else or do something else? The question I need to ask myself is, what am I bringing to the table? Probably the chances are that I have something to do with the negativity there myself. So by learning how to lead myself well, the person benefiting the most is me. So even if I decide it's still not a great environment, I have spent 3 or 6 months really dedicated to learning how to lead myself well so that whenever I go to the next place, whether it's my own business or starting something myself or retiring or a different career altogether, working for another company, I walk in with the skill set of knowing how to lead myself well. And it's not a situation that I'll need to go through again. So I would say even just from the learning experience, even if you leave, the learning experience of how to lead yourself well is priceless.
Okay, so to paraphrase, if you're in a position where you're not particularly happy, then you would say, okay, but give it 3 to 6 months. We'll come on to what you do in that 3 to 6 months, but give it 3 to 6 months, because even if you get to the end of that period and nothing's changed and you're still unhappy, you'll have learned more about yourself, more about the influence you can have or can't have on people, and just the experience itself will be helpful. And also, you never know, it might have worked. It might have helped over that time period. Having said that it takes 3 years to change a culture, what can you achieve in 3 to 6 months?
I think it depends on how many people you're talking about. So each person comes into the work environment. This is the example that we're using, the work environment, with a different set of values, beliefs, opinions. You have 10 people in the room and they each have 10 opinions, and that adds up pretty quickly. If you work with, for example, where I work right now, we have about 7 people on staff that I work with on a regular basis. We also are a part of a larger organization where there's hundreds of people. So when we're talking about changing the culture of larger organization where hundreds of people are working together constantly, it's going to take longer. Each one of those people have their own set of opinions, beliefs, values. Whereas if your work environment is a small group of people, it probably won't take as long for you to discover, is this going to work? Is this not going to work if I lead myself well? Because you're only talking about a handful of people and their opinions and their values. So that's why I think there's different time frames depending on how many people are involved in the situation.
Let's go to the start of this 6-month period. Let's call it 6 months. What's the first thing I should be doing at the start of this period? I've given myself 6 months. Yes, first of all, how do I determine what success looks like? If I've given myself 6 months, maybe that's the first thing I need to do. But how do I work out what, having done some stuff during the course of that 6 months, how am I going to know that it's worked?
I think you'll know by the way that you feel. If you are still walking into work dreading it every day, feeling the same way that you felt when you started, then you'll know.
What's the kind of, if you like, the 6-month plan? What are we going to sort of try and do over the course of the 6 months? And then breaking it down, what's kind of the first thing and maybe the second or third thing that we should do in month 1?
Yeah, actually, the great thing about this, it's really not difficult. It's actually very simple, but it does take that commitment. I'm going to do this same thing every day. I'm going to try my best. If I have a bad day, obviously, that's okay. But then the next morning, I'm going to do better. I think the first thing is really just having an understanding that conflict and tension is a good thing. I know for myself, just working through that process, I feel tension or I have a conflict with that person. It does something to me. It makes my blood pressure rise. In a conversation, I can feel my heart beating as I'm getting upset or stressed out about it. And I just thought that was an indicator that something is wrong. And I think actually that's a misnomer. I don't really think that's correct. I think when there's tension in a workplace environment, it really means that you are working with people who care. Think about it. If you went somewhere and you're in a business meeting and there was absolutely zero tension thinking about a decision your company needed to make, and no one gives any opposing opinions, no one shares any different ideas, I wouldn't say that's healthy. I would say you have a room full of people who really don't care. They're in there to clock in, clock out, and go home and not provide any of their individual talents to the team. When you go into a meeting and there's debate back and forth and there's someone says something that you don't like and you start to feel your heart beating and your blood pressure rising, that is the moment to realize this is not a bad thing. It can turn bad. It can turn unhealthy. You can say things that are not honoring to someone. We all can. But that moment in of itself, when tensions are there and there's a conflict, I think of it as this is actually a good thing. This means that the people I'm sitting around this table with, they care. They have passion. They want this to be better. They want the company to be better tomorrow than it is today. So just having the understanding that tension isn't a bad thing. Conflict is not a bad thing in of itself will change your mindset when you walk into those situations.
Okay, so that's something which you can do from a mindset perspective from the outset. What about in terms of external behaviors that you can exhibit, talking to people, doing things, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that is a great question. I always like to think about it as like an equity bank account, my relationship with each person. I think about each relationship with someone that I work with as a bank account. I go out of my way to compliment or to agree with on something that they're working on. So let's just take marketing, for example. I have a marketing background. I love things that have to do with marketing. Maybe I'm working with a marketing team and someone on the team is creating a branded font for a business. And in my mind, I think, I like the way that looks. Instead of just thinking it in my mind, something positive about that situation, actually speak it out in front of the team if that works, or just individual to that person. Say, you know what? When you presented that font that's going to be branded for the company, I really thought that was original. That was awesome. I loved that. Or even when you are in a conversation with a group of people, and let's say someone says, I think that we should change the branding color for this company from this to this. If I think that's a good idea, I don't really have anything to add to it one way or the other, but I think it's a good idea. I'm going to say out loud, John, that's a great idea. I really agree with that. So a lot of times we think, right, both positive and negative things. How many thoughts do we have a day? We have anywhere from 9,000 to, I think it's 30,000 thoughts a day. Women usually have closer to the 30,000 thoughts than men. So when you think about how many of those thoughts you have a day, the ones that are positive about the workplace or about someone in particular on your team, go ahead and say them. Go ahead and say them out loud, say them in the meeting, honor people in front of other people. How do you feel when someone does that for you? When you've put time into creating a branded font or whatever it might be for your workplace, and someone else notices and says, I really liked that idea. I really liked the way that you did that. It means a lot. It deposits something into that relationship bank. So the first thing I try to do is start depositing those things into my relationship banks with people. It doesn't mean placating or saying things you don't mean. Be genuine. That's most important, because when you're not, it's pretty easy to tell. Be genuine. But when you think positive things about someone or something, go ahead and speak it out and tell them, because then you are actually, as you deposit those things into your friendship, relationship bank account, you're building equity. And so let's say you do that. You do that several times a day. You're complimenting people. You're letting them know that you noticed what they did, that you agreed with that idea that you thought, or even you said, you know what, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to think about what you said and see if I can do that better. Then let's say next week they come and they've created something or spent time on something, and you have a legit reason to say that you don't agree with that idea. It comes across so much better when you have already deposited so many positive things into that bank account you have with them. Because every time you correct someone, every time you disagree with someone, every time you want to propose an opposing idea, you're actually withdrawing some of that equity. So then in that meeting, when you say, you know what, I understand what you're saying here, but this is what I think about it. The person immediately, without even knowing, they are checking their equity with you. And if they respect you, if they feel like this is an honest opinion that you are bringing to the table, they don't feel threatened by you, they are going to hear what you have to say. Their defenses aren't going to rise up. They're going to be able to, oh, okay, thanks for sharing that, because you have built up that equity already in the past.
I can see this being an extremely valuable tool and activity, and just change of sort of the way you act in the workplace in terms of interpersonal relationships. So if the problem at work is not getting on with people, then this is something that you can try to see how you can improve that aspect of it. Now, interpersonal relationships at work are an extremely important aspect of any workplace, but they're not necessarily the only one. So perhaps we can talk about some of the other things that might be, when you're at the start of this process, that might be wrong. Something like, I find the work really boring, that sort of thing. So that's not going to necessarily be solved or tested by generally going around and sort of being more positive with people. So what can you do to sort of test that over this 3 to 6 month period you've got?
That is a really good question. That might actually be easier than dealing with people. I think if we are doing some type of work that in of itself doesn't give us life, then something to do with that work is not a strength of ours. I love to find out what my strengths are and spend time building up my strengths, then spend time building up my weaknesses. Here's an example that I heard. Let's say there's someone who really wants to be a singer, but she has no talent. I use myself as this example. I would love to be on the stage and be a singer in front of 1,000 people, but they would probably throw tomatoes at me because I just don't have the talent. Now I can sign up for a class. I can take voice lessons for years and years and years. I can spend all that time. If I'm not wired to have that talent, I will only reach a certain level regardless of the amount of classes that I take, if it's just not something that I'm wired to do. Whereas you might have someone else who's just born with that natural talent and she loves to do it. And she may not need to take any classes. She doesn't need to work hard at all. That here she walks in the door and she can sing to 1,000 people and they love her and give her a standing ovation. We'll put that into our workplace. We might find ourselves in a job, in a position, doing something that really just doesn't utilize our strengths. And so we feel like we're beating our head against the wall because we are trying so hard to like this or make it better. And it just isn't. I would say identifying what your strengths are is the first thing that you should do. A great tool that I personally like to use is Strength Finders from Gallup. It's a book. You can get it on Amazon or any major bookstore, and it comes with a little test. I love personality tests. I've probably taken every single one that's out there. It's my favorite thing. I love Strength Finders by Gallup by far the most because Gallup is one of worldwide leaders in research, and it goes into a lot of detail. So by doing that, when you do that test, you get your top 5 strengths. And in each one of those, and you can read about what those are, it talks about how you can use this in the workplace. And even some of those give examples such as, if you're doing this for your job, try doing it this way. Here's a great example. If you are a writer and you are just having a difficult time writing and that's your job and you have to write or you have to edit copy or whatever it might be, and you are just struggling with that work over and over again. Well, maybe your strength is communication, but maybe it's more communication with people or talking something out. So then it might be grab a microphone and record yourself writing something before you try to put pen to paper if you get stuck, because your strength is actually speaking things out and talking to an audience. So pretend you're talking to an audience face to face, grab a microphone and record yourself. And that might help the roadblock of sitting down and trying to write something pen to paper just on your computer. So it gives examples in that book. It gives examples of how you can kind of tweak what you do to make it fit the strengths that you have. And I think it also will give someone freedom, because if they read something and then realize, 100% of what I'm doing actually falls into my weakness categories. Instead of just, I'm just going to leave this job and this job sucks. Actually, if you do leave that job, you are going to leave being equipped, knowing what your strengths are. Each one of the strengths comes with an example of where you might be best suited to work, what type of work you might be best suited to do. So I think in that situation, a person probably won't need 3 to 6 months to decide if this is really what they should be doing. I think pretty quickly after going through that and implementing what they suggest into the workplace, you will find out, actually, this is a weakness of mine. It isn't suited for me, but I'm equipped to know that there's a variety of other things that are already my strength that I can walk into and succeed right off the bat because they are strengths of mine.
What about where you have something which you think is a strength, but you don't necessarily enjoy doing it?
Many strengths are equally your weaknesses. So my strength is communication. Actually, that's my number one strength is communication. And that really came as no surprise to me that it was a strength of mine, but it becomes a weakness because I say things that I shouldn't say. I talk too much in meetings. I over communicate. In the workplace, I would probably send my team 10 emails a day or more because I feel like everything I want to communicate is so important because it's a passion of mine and it's a strength of mine. I have to hone it in and I have to realize just because this is a strength of mine of communication, my teammates in the workplace don't want to receive 10 emails from me or more. They don't want me to speak up in every conversation and give my opinion on every single thing. So for me, it's a constant reminder of keeping that strength kind of in a checks and balance. Have I deposited the equity before I say something and speak into this? Does this really need to be an email right now? Can I type it out and save it as a draft? And then when I have some more to add to it, so I'm only sending one email a day that has all 10 items listed in it in an easy to read format. So I think depending on what your strength is, you're right. You're going to find that there's a weakness to it. And sometimes you think that weakness, you just don't identify it. That, oh, that's a weakness, not because it's something wrong for me, but because I don't know how to drive that strength. I don't know how to use it. So it's like you give someone a bike that's never learned how to ride a bike. They're not going to ride the bike. They're going to get on it. They're going to fall off. They're going to scrape their knee. But if they can learn how to ride the bike, then once they know how to do it, they become like, oh, this can take me anywhere I want to go. I just had to learn how to do that. It's the same way with our strength. Our strengths can take us anywhere we want to go, but we do need to learn how to drive them.
I think that's a really good point. And I kind of think of myself, one of the things that I think is one of my strengths is I'm quite sort of analytical. I'll research things a lot. I'll kind of go down to the nth degree and then realize that I'm starting to get frustrated with myself in doing that. So it could be, I don't know, I'm buying a new washing machine and I'll start doing this research and then go into something else and then go into something else and then go into something else. And I know that I am very good at researching things and all that sort of stuff. But then I realize it's driving me absolutely potty and I'm just stressing myself out looking at things. So that's, well, to me, I don't know about anyone else, but to me, that's quite a good example of using the strength the wrong way. It's kind of, like you said, knowing when to stop. So in that case, it's, okay, you've got the hand of pedaling, but now you need to be able to know when to press the handbrake as well.
My husband, his number one is analytic, actually, in the strength finders. And so we like to say, I'm the gas and he's the brakes. But I like this example because it's really good. Once you identify what your strength is, you can also identify how that can be a weakness. Then you pair yourself in the workplace environment. No, like I want to pair myself with someone who can balance that out. And a lot of times that's where tension comes in because we are working with people that are different than us. But when we can realize, no, actually they balance out my strengths and my weaknesses and we can be a team, then in the workplace, you can be so much more efficient when you make sure that people on the team, you let them strive in their strength and you let them balance out your strengths and your weaknesses.
We're still in this 3 to 6 month phase and we're now looking at strengths. Is something that we should be doing during this 3 to 6 month test period, as well as identifying what our strengths are and how best we can use them? What is the right way for us to use them? Is that period also a time to look whether that is available in our place of work? Because presumably I've been hired to do a job and it might be that actually I am better personally suited to doing something else. Query, is that something else going to be available in my place of work? Is that something that we try to look for as well?
I think absolutely. My hope would be that in those workplace environments that there is a boss or a supervisor, business owner that really wants to put people into roles where they can thrive in their strength. Obviously, that's going to be the best for the business, any business, that each person in each role is doing something that they can succeed in. There's that factor. I think it also goes down to the personal factor as well of your bank with your supervisor, your bank with the business owner, your bank with your boss. Do what they're asking you to do. I like to say it's like leaders pay the freight. Leaders are the first to go. So if you're leading yourself well, you're going to have to pay the freight first. An example of that is before I was a pastor, I volunteered at the church. I unclogged a lot of toilets. That's what I did. Unclogging toilets is not a strength of mine. It doesn't give me any joy. It doesn't give me, I'm not like excited about going into unclogged toilets personally or cleaning, things like that. They're just not strengths of mine. But when I dedicated time to doing it, because that's what I was asked to do, and then I was able to identify what my strengths are, I had enough equity with the person that gets to make that decision in that particular job to say, this, guess what? I did this Strength Finders test and I got these results and I found out that I'm wired to do these things very well. And I noticed that in our company, there's a position that outlines pretty much the same things, however you want to word that. And then kind of ask them, do you think that I would be well suited for that someday? Or a great open-ended question would be, can you let me know, can you speak into how I can grow into a role that looks like XYZ? Another example of this for me is I love to speak. I love to preach. I love to go to conferences and speak. I just love to talk. But I also know that I need to grow in the way that I organize data, the way that I present information. So it's in a cohesive manner that people can understand, that I stay on track and don't go over time because I love to talk. I can do that. I can take a 30-minute message and make it 2 hours. So I go to my senior leader and say, this communication is a strength of mine, and I would love to provide that strength for our church, but I also know that I need to grow. And I would love to be in a position that I can do this more, but can you just mentor me? Can you give me some pointers when we meet to have our annual review or monthly review, however your company works? Can you give me some pointers on how I might grow into that role so that if it ever becomes available, I might be considered? If I were a boss or a supervisor or a business owner, I would feel so good that my employee came to me for advice. My employee came to me and let me know that they are looking to move into a role that will utilize their strengths rather than if they didn't say anything. Because if they didn't say anything and they didn't let me know, they're going to be unhappy for only a certain period of time and then they're going to leave the company. But if I can put them into a role that best utilizes their strengths and there's a mutual trust in that relationship and growing into that, as soon as that role comes up, and as soon as I feel this person is ready to step into that, I am sure going to give them that position. So I would say, to answer your question, if that works in your work environment, you see that there's another role that's really best suited for you. Talking to your supervisor about it, but more asking them for advice, letting them know that you feel like you would be qualified for that you're excited about that. This is actually a strength of yours. And then just saying, what do you think that looks like? And allow them to speak into it. They'll feel so honored that you came and spoke to them about it.
Let's just fast forward to the end of our 6-month test period. And you've mentioned that a certain amount of this is going to be based on gut, just sort of feeling better. But for those of us who are perhaps a bit more analytically minded, what can you kind of do as you get to the end of that 6 months in terms of taking stock? How can you kind of get the thoughts more organized in your head so you can start to think, well, either, no, I've given it my best shot, I think I do need to look for something else, or, you know what, this is worth pursuing, it's worth me giving it a bit longer.
Whenever we are making big decisions, it's very difficult to have clarity when we're making them in the heat of the moment and when unhealthy tensions are high. So if we have really gone through this 3 to 6 month period of leading ourselves well and being responsible for ourselves, automatically by the end of that period, our tensions are going to be lower and we are not going to be in the heat of the moment. So we will have lots of clarity. And when we get to that point, I think whichever way you decide to go, it's going to be very clear. We're going to look back at the 6 month and say, wow, I have seen so much growth in myself. I've actually become friends with my coworkers. I've learned how to take these tasks where before just gave me indigestion thinking about having to do them, where now I actually look forward in the morning to going. I see the value in what I do. I don't want to leave this place. That's going to happen. And then you will just continue your everyday that way and it will only get better and better. Or you say, okay, I'm at the end of my 6 months and I've learned how to lead myself well. I've learned what my strengths are. I've implemented them. I've deposited feedback into the bank accounts of my relationship of people that I work with. I've done these things. I feel like I've learned a lot about myself. And I can honestly say that even with all of these things, this isn't a good fit for me. But now I know what type of role, what type of job, what type of career would be a good fit for me. And I can confidently look for those things and know that when I walk into that role, I'm already equipped to succeed.
And do you recommend any kind of sort of taking stock exercise, like, I don't know, 2 columns on a piece of paper or anything like that? Or is it just a case of being, at the end of that period, you've got a pretty good idea?
Yeah, there, I think it will go into your personality type so finding your strengths will help you determine how best to make a decision. My guess would be if you are like my husband wants data. He would probably want to chart something out, write a list of pros and cons, probably even track some of the progress. But for someone like me, I'm more of a feelings person. I'm more of like a compassionate heart. And so I might just focus on how I'm personally feeling and my gut instinct. But because that's a strength of mine, now that I know how to use my strength, I can pretty well trust my gut instinct. I'm confident with those decisions. For someone who is more about analytics, you're good. You know the research that you've done. You know it's solid research. You know that you can look at that and you can trust when you get to making a decision, you can trust that it's the right one because you've done the research. So depending on your strength will depend on how you come to that decision towards the end. But I would say for someone maybe like you, like my husband, yes, making a list of pros and cons so that you can actually look at and see will help you make a decision.
Jamie, there's been some fantastic just content, thought experiments, practical exercises that people can do here. Something I probably should have asked you earlier on in this interview, but how did you come by sort of all this insight and all these exercises and all this stuff?
Well, we mentioned that I'm a pastor, so I'm a person of faith. But about 10 years ago, I had just a meltdown. My marriage was failing, was filing for divorce, moved out of my house. I was working at a place where basically I was punching numbers from one thing to the next in accounting. And there has to be something more is what I thought. I was upset in every area of my life. And, in that moment, I found faith. But I also found that I was looking at a lot of things the wrong way. I was putting it on other people. I was putting it on my husband to make me happy. I was putting it on my children to make me feel like a good mother. I was putting it on my work to give me satisfaction. I was putting it on my workplace, people that I worked with, other coworkers, to make me feel like what I did mattered. And it was then when I realized that really is not their responsibility. The responsibility lies within myself. And so that was a time of really digging to see what that looks like. And I actually found that I love accounting. I love punching numbers. I just didn't realize that what I did mattered. I had a great boss at the time, and I basically told her, my life is a mess. I don't love my job. I don't love my husband. I don't love anything. I'm a failure at everything, and I'm just doing everything wrong. And she took some time to explain to me, at least with my role there in the business, what punching those numbers mean. It means that we're sure that the bank accounts are where they're supposed to be. It means that we're sure that we're spending the money that we're supposed to spend or not spend. And every time I do that, and every time I make sure that my job is done well, I'm securing that our factory line workers are making the right products. I'm securing that we're being efficient as a company. At that point, that company, I think, had 100 or 200 employees, that I am ensuring that we're being efficient so that they can all have jobs and go home and feed their families. And every time that I walk in and out of the office, I need to be looking at those employees and realize that what I'm doing by checking our bank accounts matters in that way. It just gave me a whole different perspective because I have a heart of compassion, not analytical. I have a heart of compassion. And so I realized for myself, what I do matters. And once that changed, I noticed that people started coming to my office and asking questions like, what changed? Something has changed in you. You like what you're doing. Why do you like what you're doing? And they were often people that didn't like what they were doing either. They wanted to know, I want what you have. And so when I explained to them how what we do matters and how people rely on us and this business relies on us and this business then can pay employees who can then provide food for their families and it helps our small community, that what we do matters, it started to radiate into other people. And other people started to think that what they did mattered as well. And it just created a culture. And I wish I could say that I was the one who created that culture. Honestly, it was my boss. It was my boss who sat down and really instilled in me that what I did mattered. But even if we are working in a place that we don't have a supervisor like that, we can do it just ourselves. And so then it became that people, they actually used to joke and call me Pastor Jamie. This is before I even attended a church. They used to say, if you have any problems, go talk to Pastor Jamie. And they would come over and even start to share their personal problems, because through this, my marriage was healed as well, because I realized that my husband wasn't even responsible for my happiness. Only I was in my relationship with God. Freeing my husband from that allowed him to find his own strengths and be his own person. And it helped our relationship. So then people were coming in and asking, how is this? I want what you have. So that process actually led me into doing more research. I was on a few other podcasts, a few other shows, just because of people being interested in, we see the change that this had in your life. How can we have the change in our life? And I'm not an expert with big letters behind my name. I'm not a doctor. I have not gone to school for this. My schooling is unrelated. It's life experience. And it's actually taken the time to put these things into practice and seeing the change, so much so that other people see it and notice it too, and start to ask questions. And that has given me just an opportunity to share what I've learned in different platforms, and over the past 10 years, grow in it and read books myself and learn things all the time.
So you've mentioned one book, the Gallup Strength Finders books. Are there any other books, quotes, resources that you can recommend that people look into to learn more about this sort of thing?
Yeah, I have two others. There's a book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. I believe it's by Clay Scroggins, C-L-A-Y, Clay Scroggins, but How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And then the other book is Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk. And both of these books talk about how you can only control yourself, and give you some ideas and pointers on how you can control yourself pretty much in any situation, in the workplace or in relationships. The great thing about Gallup with Strength Finders and about the Keep Your Love On is both of those authors and research companies have podcasts. So if you love listening to podcasts and don't want the book, you can look for their podcasts and you can get things on a weekly basis, just little gold nugget.
And where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm on Facebook, like most people, but my name on there is Jamie Crosier. If you search, you might be able to find me. But I have a new website, organizelikeapro.us, and there's a contact on there too, so you can find me there either way.
Fantastic. I will link to both of those in the show notes. Jamie, this has been really, really interesting. Lots of great exercises and thought experiments. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Jamie Crosier. Well, I have to say, the idea of not necessarily jumping ship, but seeing what you can do to improve things within your place of work, I thought that was a really interesting one. I love this concept of leading yourself and identifying what things you might be able to do either within yourself, within your mindset, or in your interactions with other people to try and improve the position. Sure, in some cases that's not always going to work, but Jamie made a great point that just think about what you learn from the act of doing it. So, maybe it takes you 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And then at the end of that, maybe you conclude, no, it's still not the right place for you. But just the exercise, the having gone through that process means that you'll set yourself up for just a better chance of success in future roles. It's definitely also worth bearing in mind what Jamie was saying about conflict and tension potentially being good. If you're having a disagreement with someone about how something should be run, well, that probably is an indicator that both of you really care about what you're talking about. You might have a different point of view, but it's worth bearing that in mind. We're having this disagreement because we both care about what we're doing. It goes to a wider point of putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. What are their motivations? What are they thinking about? What are their concerns? There's definitely a lot to be said for thinking about these things from the perspective of the other person. Show notes with links to the resources mentioned by Jamie and where you can find her, including a link to her new podcast, are all at changewhatlife.com/61. And whilst you're there, it's worth revisiting episode 55 with Doug Levin. In that episode, we talked about what it takes to make a really good CV, a CV that's going to go through the automated and human-operated applicant tracking systems. He's got some great advice as to both the form and the content of your CV, of your resume. And don't forget that if you would like to take advantage of Doug's services, get some professional help with your CV or resume, then if you go to changewhatlife.com/jobstars, that's JOBSTARS, all one word, that's changewhatlife.com/ doug.com/jobstars, then you'll be able to get 10% off the services which Doug has to offer, should you wish to take advantage of them. We've got another great interview next week where one of the things we're going to be looking at is imposter syndrome, that feeling that why are you the person who's doing this and teaching this? What makes you so special that you are able to do this? That's what we talk about. It's going to be a great episode and I can't wait to see you then. Cheers. Bye.